In the name of the one holy and living God. Well, happy Easter. Sometime last year, I'm not entirely sure when, Bishop Loya preached a sermon here where he quoted G.K. Chesterton. The quote is this: "The Christian ideal has not been tried and found wanting," he said. "It has been found difficult and left untried." I have remembered that ever since. And this first Sunday in Easter, we wrestle with the question of what do we do when we've had a mountaintop experience? How do we transition from Lenten preparation and then Easter joy into a life that is sustained by that preparation and that joy? Today's wonderful reading from Acts reminds me of the young man who comes to Jesus in Matthew and says, "Hey, so I've done all this properly observant stuff, and I believe all the right things. What else do I need to do?" And Jesus looks at him and says, "Sell everything you have and give it to the poor." And the young man goes away dejected, we're told, for he was very wealthy. Now, this is kind of a funny story, even if it cuts to the bone a bit. Have any of you sold all you have and given it to the poor? I haven't either. When you think about that notion, how does it make you feel? Probably a bit strange, and maybe you're thinking, well, that doesn't sound like a great long-term ministry strategy, then we'll all be poor. Or if you're me and you've watched a lot of documentaries on Netflix about cults, you're like, I know what that is. I've seen that. The Acts passage, though, is a little bit different from the passage in Matthew. There, Jesus challenged a young man to let go of something that was of overweening importance to him, something that was becoming an idol, something he was keeping for himself despite having more than he needed. The Acts passage is not prescriptive. Jesus isn't telling anyone to do anything. Jesus isn't in the passage. Instead, as we look at these early Christians, we get to see how they reacted to Easter. And we get to wonder, what does the world look like where the young man wants to share all that he has with the people around him? Not because he's told to, but because he just wants to. He wants to share his abundance. The great discussion that happens whenever this passage from Acts comes up in sermon prep groups or in Bible studies is this communism? And I just want to say that communism and socialism were not a thing in first century Roman Judea. Neither was capitalism. No one had heard of the USSR. No one had heard of Cuba or the United States. The Wealth of Nations had not yet been written by Adam Smith, and Karl Marx had not yet written Das Kapital. These concepts did not exist, and we put a lot of socio-political freight onto this passage that the folks who originally wrote it and those of us who read it for the first 1,800 years just didn't have. What Luke, I think, is saying is, okay, a huge transformative mountaintop experience thing has happened. The one who died for us on the cross was resurrected from the dead. Death isn't the end. That's news. That's amazing, and it's really confusing. How do I live now? Those who had that mountaintop experience were changed by it. They now lived in a world where they weren't told they had to sell everything and give it away. They lived in a world where sharing their abundance seemed like the obvious thing to do. So they did it. So how now do we live, given the knowledge and experience of Easter? is the great question of Eastertide, which is the season that we will be in for the next, I think I did the math, to 43 days, taking us to Pentecost on May 19th. Not that we stop thinking about it there, but like this is the season for it. So how do we bring the insights of Easter? Oneness with God and each other, the whole world waking up to something new. How do we bring that into our lives and into our life together? Acts talks about sharing abundance. Our psalm talks about the abundance that comes from living together in unity rather than disunity. John talks about fellowship and peace. Unless this seem like rosy-lensed, aspirational nonsense, remember that Luke and John are writing after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, and not just the destruction of the temple. In 66 AD, following significant political unrest in Judea, the Roman Emperor Nero sent troops in. Over the next 4 years, war would rage. And in 70 AD, the Roman general Titus breached the defenses and razed the temple and much of the city of Jerusalem. Leaders who were unable to escape were killed or sold into slavery. And if you have seen the Arch of Titus in the Roman Forum, that's the terrible victory that it represents. Luke is probably writing within 10 or 15 years of that event, and John's writing a little later, maybe 20, 25 years. So think back 20, 25 years, what was going on. And what are they writing about? Revenge, winning, power as a means of self-protection. No, they are doubling down on a vision of the world rooted in the radical love of a crucified and risen Messiah. Remember Jesus' great commandment in John from Maundy Thursday? Love each other as I have loved you. By this, people shall know that you are my followers, that you love one another. That's it. You'll be known as Christians because other people can see that you love each other. Death is not the end, Easter teaches us. And in the face of death and chaos and pain, they chose love, not the alternatives, and not with contingency. They preach love and repentance and mutual care. These are not people who have never known difficulty or anger, who have never seen loved ones die or their worlds fall apart. These are people in communities whose wisdom and call to love is rooted in the experience of pain and death. Love wins out, they tell us. Love each other as I have loved you. And so our task too begins anew this Easter. How do we live now? And what do we do? I can tell you that the pollinator garden out on the green, planted and cared for by St. Markin's out of love for this patch of creation, is poking up. Now, I know it's raining, but go see it as you leave today. It's just off the parking lot. I can tell you that there are a number of actions being planned to help our neighbors who are food insecure, and that team is inviting us to help next Sunday at the 9:15 hour. And I know that so many of us have work that we do in our communities, and I so hope you'll tell each other about it. All of these are examples of choosing love and sharing our abundance. The Christian ideal is indeed difficult. But when you experience the risen Christ, you know that it is always worth trying.